guys, welcome back to Elderwood Games. Thomas here, and today I wanted to talk about the points updates and everything for Warhammer 11th edition. I'm really excited and interested to kind of dive in and give some of my thoughts on the points changes for my particular armies that I will be playing in 11th edition. And then we'll kind of talk through a little bit of that, and then I think I'll probably do independent videos on what I'm thinking for each of my factions in the coming weeks. So basically what I did is I grabbed the information earlier this week from my old app and just kind of jotted down where my collections all sit and what my current list totals were, because at our shop, typically, you may also experience this. Usually if you're like within 5 to 10, you're usually pretty okay. So a couple of my lists were a little over 2,000. A couple of them were a little below 2,000. And that's what I was basically playing whenever I did a 2,000 point game. And then of course I have my collection, but then I also included my list totals with my backlog as well. So that way I had an idea, maybe we can look at what my collection would have looked like if we were still in 10th. And then also what it looks like or will look like when it's done here for 11th. So without further ado, let's get started with Tyranids. So for Tyranids, my current 2,000 point list was exactly at 2,000, and I actually dropped 10 points to 1,990. My Tyranids collection was at 3,080. It has dropped to 3,050. And then with the backlog tacked onto that, it was at 3,975. And in this case, it actually has increased to 3,995. So that's like the one instance in probably all of my collections that it actually goes up into 11th edition from what it would have been in 10th. And for Tyranids, I didn't really see a ton of my stuff really get hit too hard. I was already running, so the Terrain Effects is one that people may call out. So it had a points drop, but the Rupture Cannon, which is the gun you always use, has a pretty hefty war gear cost on there. But with the drop and the war gear cost, it actually stayed the same. The Norn Emissary, actually I believe both the Norns actually have a tax on your second and third. So those ended up being roughly the same. So it sort of ended up being net neutral. One of the odd hits were the Hormagaunts. So Hormagaunts actually went up 5 points per 10, but doing the 20, it is, so it's like 70 points for 10, but down to 120 for 20. So if you're like me and you run a ton of them, running them in 20s might be a good way to kind of save on some points here and there. But also having, multiple 10 bricks to be able to run, do actions and that sort of thing, or just tie up some enemy units is actually really useful. But really outside of that, I didn't have any like major hits to my particular lists, which is great. I felt like I actually get to add stuff in and be able to move stuff around and sort of have some fun list building and finding some interesting things to point out and do that way. As a little bit of teaser, so for Tyranids, I typically play Invasion Fleet. So that's one of the 3 detachment point lists for 11th edition. And I definitely plan to play that probably as my main. But now with some of my backlog, I'll be having more Vanguard Invader and Burrowing units. So I plan to play the Subterranean Assault Force. And then I also am looking at actually running a list that is the 3 1-point detachments, because there's the Vanguard one that helps out Lictors, Leapers, and Neurolictors. And I run quite a few of those. So running that one. The Norn one, so having a couple of Norns that have basically the ability to redetermine their primary objective once per battle is going to be really nice, or I can switch it to basically targeting a specific enemy if I need to really zero in on it. So that'll be cool. And then the last one, the Warrior Bioform Onslaught. So it basically turns your warriors into battle line. And after I get my backlog caught up, I'll have 4 units of 3. I usually run them in 6 though, so that part doesn't really matter so much. But it does give them a 5 of invulnerable save, and it gives the you get a stratagem to be able to secure or sticky objectives with your warriors, which is something that Tyranids kind of needed. So having that in my arsenal as well is going to be really cool. And then another attachment I'm kind of looking at, because thankfully, like my Tyranid units, because I really wasn't focusing on like a typical bioform, I was really just focusing on getting good like melee kind of stuff and the swarm. It actually kind of helped me dip into a bunch of different baskets, which has been really nice. But another list, I'm looking at doing the Vanguard Invaders with the Ambush Assault. So that's the one detachment point, detachment that helps out your Leapers and Lictors and stuff like that. So I felt like those two really worked well together. It gives your Lictors and the Neurolictor deep strike, so I have a little bit more ability to kind of board control with them and that sort of thing. I think the list that I end up kind of prioritizing is going to be more based on the dispositions and the missions associated with those dispositions. Thankfully, across all of mine, I think I can basically have a list that does any one of the 5. So I'll be able to kind of pick and choose what I think is best for them in this edition and which one I end up having the most fun playing. I really enjoy Invasion Fleet. I think it's really strong. And I know a lot of the stratagems kind of by like the back of my hand now. So having to learn all the new ones and that sort of thing is going to be fun for sure. I enjoy like finding out new ways to play and that sort of thing, but it is going to be a little bit daunting. But that does it for my Tyranids. I think ultimately I came up on the winning side of this kind of balance update because a lot of my stuff dropped. I didn't really have anything that moved too much out of alignment, and it gave me enough wiggle room to be able to consider shuffling up my lists in a really cool way. So next up is going to be the Tau. So Tau actually had quite a big shakeup. I feel they got hit a lot with the War Gear option kind of cost. So now basically all the Crisis Suit units minus Sunforge have optional War Gear with increased cost. The Ghost Keel and the Riptide both had their kind of Ion Accelerator and Cyclic Ion Rakers have the alternate points cost and that sort of thing. And then also Riptide and Ghost Keel have the tax on the spammed unit. So I believe both of those get the increased cost at the 3rd unit. But let's talk about what the numbers ended up being and where they all stand now. So in 10th edition, my 2,000 point list for Tau was actually 2,005 points. Like I said before, our shop usually is fine about 10 or 15 out from the total. If you can, basically we kind of talk and it's like if you can cut something, like if you're running an enhancement or something that can put you to 2,000, you cut down to 2,000, but usually about 5 or 10 isn't going to be too much. So it was 2005, now it's 1995, so I'm now under, but also some of the other things shook up, and I'll talk about that in just a sec. My collection before was 3,055, it is now down to 3,030. My backlog collection before was 3,875, it has dropped to 3,860. So across the board, drops in Tau, and that's completely fine. I would prefer it that way. Honestly, I think most of us are in the same boat. I'll talk a little bit later about sort of the degrading kind of points values over sort of over time and what we might expect just as we go through this edition. But yeah, I think ultimately with Tau, I'm a big Retaliation Cadre player. The only one that I might spec into instead is potentially Kalyan and using the experimental prototype cadre, but because they changed how the experimental one works, it's no longer everything gets +6 range. It's now just your character battle suits. It's kind of like not great in my opinion, but it is one that has the battle suit keyword, so you can't tag it in with Retaliation Cadre. Kind of wish you could. I feel like those two would work well together and not necessarily be like extremely overpowered, but feel free to tell me that I'm wrong down in the comments. Totally fine with that. So what I'm planning with my Tau for primary purposes is going to be the Retaliation Cadre, it's 2 detachment points, and the Advanced Acquisitions Cadre. So that's the one that benefits your stealth battle suits and Pathfinder teams. I run 3 stealth battle suits. I think they're great. Rerolls of 1s to hit and wound on your marked units. So it ends up really buffing all your other shooting, and they can get into places and that sort of thing. It also gives you a 1 CP to secure / sticky objectives, which I think is going to be really beneficial for my list and that sort of thing. I think their dispositions are reconnaissance for the acquisitions cadre, and then it's purge the foe for retaliation. So I'll be able to choose between taking my enemy stuff out and also having board presence. And I feel like my battle suits are maneuverable enough that I'm able to get in and out of places very easily. So I think that that's going to be a pretty good balance to be able to kind of choose between. So I'll be interested to find out which disposition I end up leaning in more as we get through the edition. Last but not least, my 11th edition army that I was supposed to have ready for 11th edition is Chaos Knights. Obviously, I had just some hobby burnout and some stuff like that that made me just not really prioritize my knights as much. But nonetheless, I have 2 of the big knights. At the end of 10th edition, they were 710 points, and now they have dropped to 695 points. And then I do have a couple of war dogs, mostly assembled. They're in sub-assembly, ready for paint. And when we tack those guys on, we're looking at 990 points before 10th, and we dropped down to 965 points for 11th edition. So a little bit of a drop. They didn't really have much moving around. I think some of it came from the changes to the towering rule. So now all your big knights will be able to do plunging fire into things within 12 inches, which is really good. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play them. I am excited to play them. I think after I get through my Tyranids next month, I think I'm going to be excited to paint something other than organic stuff, since I've painted my Seraphon and then Tyranids. It'll be cool to have like armor and plating and stuff like that to do. So most likely we're going to be pivoting towards that list. Or if I end up really wanting to play Tau, I may do some battle suits and that sort of thing. But now let's kind of talk, generally speaking, about the points updates and all of that. I think most of us that watch this channel are ones that maybe have played at least a little bit of 10th, maybe enough to see a couple of the balanced data slates and that sort of thing. So we know that most of the time in these new updates, things go down in points. And I think this is a case where a lot of things got cut more than a lot of things went up. I think they saw the end of 10th edition, and basically anything that was problematic on the tournament scene saw a pretty significant increase in points. I think that things that they saw as a potential issue for 11th edition may have gotten slight updates, but I think on some cases where they tacked on those upgrade costs, I think they may have downshifted points a little bit too much. I think basically with my 2,000 point list currently, I run a couple of ethereals. That's 100 points in 10th edition. Unfortunately, ethereals are support, so they have to have bodyguard units, so I can't run them alone anymore, which from a lore standpoint makes a lot of sense, but they were my CP farm, and now I don't have those, so I'm having to kind of tweak around, figure out where I'm going to get those extra CP generators from. Since I run Retaliation Cadre, I can run an enhancement that gives me a 50% chance when I use a stratagem to get the stratagem back. So it's not really gaining me CP, but it's keeping me from spending as much. So win some, lose some, right? So that sort of thing. But because I'm having to cut them out, and also with some of the other points drops, I'm actually able to cash in and bring in at least one more battlesuit unit. And with some of the other changes, I'm debating swapping a Ghost Kill out for another battlesuit unit as well to just really ham the Crisis battlesuits, because I think they're going to be really good this edition. That's kind of the shakeup that I'm seeing. It seems like a lot of stuff did go down, and I feel like a lot of the like general stuff kind of went down. But usually, especially at the start of an edition, we see pretty hefty point drops. And I think that's to help drive sales, because obviously like everyone's going to try and get to that 2,000 points. So if they were close and now they were, now they're down maybe 100, 150, maybe even 200 points, you're buying another tank, you're buying another couple of battle line, you're buying like an elite unit to kind of match into, get up to the close to 2,000, maybe filling in the gap with some of the enhancements from your detachments. But yeah, I think this one is one where they cut back a little bit more than they maybe should have. So I think we might see potentially, they did talk about potentially having a points update as soon as July. But I think we might get a little bit of whiplash when we see kind of how the first wave of tournaments and stuff go. I think they have a couple in June, and they mentioned they want to make sure they have a few of these events kind of under their belt, kind of official events under their belt, obviously, to be able to see where the best of the best players are kind of moving their points, using those points, and how that's all looking. So it'll be interesting to see. I actually really like where they are now. Obviously, my armies got some good benefits, I think. I think ultimately my armies are all in a good place. I think the worst one is the Ethereal having to have bodyguard units. I'm not necessarily against running one with a strike team, but I liked having two because they made for good marks for guiding, and also the CP farm, making it basically a 75% chance to get one at only 100 points, is pretty good in at least Xenos factions and that sort of thing. So those are kind of my thoughts on the 11th edition points updates. Let me know how your armies fared in this first wave of the edition and what kind of shakeups and stuff happened with your list. I'd be interested to know down in the comments down below. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys watching all the way here to the end. So I hope to see you all in the next one. See you guys.